Hello and welcome to the Powerful Personal Brand Podcast. I am your host, Claire Bahn, and on today's episode, I am very excited to be joined by Andrew Stallings. He is the founder and president of Athelo Group, a leading athlete marketing agency. He has been featured in outlets such as Sports Business Journal and Front Office Sports and has over 15 years of experience in sports, entertainment, and media. Andrew, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having a dinosaur like myself join you today. This is great.
Dinosaur. No, we don't talk like that. We are a positive place, so positivity only. So
I love it.
I have been I've had a couple episodes recently about kind of like sports marketing, about athletes kind of getting more into personal branding. So this is a great time to talk about it. So like, what shift have you seen? I mean, things have kind of shifted. I mean, there were always those people like Tom Brady and people like that just that had a brand, right? Because they just were so great at what they did. But you see a lot of people just really starting in college and beyond that are really starting to go like, hey, I should do something about this. What do you think the shift, what happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a great starting point, and probably a lot of things that you talk about week in and week out, is where does the kind of foundational support of a brand start, right? And I think you're looking at it more often than not now that influencers, creators, the mailman, they too can create a brand in any capacity, and it's never been more of an approachable kind of position for people to be influential in today's modern society, which is a gift and a curse, just to some regard. But if you take a step back to use some of the names and examples like you were alluding to, talking about some of the more reputable names of sports of the early 2000s, such as Tom Brady, and go back to the 90s where you had, Michael Jordan on the side, those focuses are on performance. And
Hmm.
I think as the performance output and results, kind of deem that necessary allure that typically travels with a brand, you also may not necessarily focus on the pivot and good case studies and examples of the counterparts of some of those very widely successful individuals. With every Tom Brady, there's a Rob Gronkowski or even an
Hmm.
Aaron Hernandez, right? For every Michael Jordan, there's a Dennis Rodman, there's a Scottie Pippen. And those examples and case studies of how their influence is still just as impactful and it's as measurable to different consumer markets, demographics, economic areas of revenue and return is something where I typically start and look at what is the eye-opening approach. For context and background, like you mentioned, over 15 years in sports and entertainment. I've had the rare privilege of having a lot of seats at the table of sports, as we call it. I started my career at Sirius XM Radio. So the media industry is all about who the networking, the marketing, really the personality, in a lot of ways of, again, what you're talking about from the educational side. But you're really learning quickly that as a media personality, you're at that intersection, as I call it, of education and entertainment. And
Hmm.
none of that is more true than when you go over to a big agency like I did with Octagon that manages some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment, like Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, Steph Curry, to name a few. I spent several years working with some of the biggest brands on their events and hospitality and sponsorship activation teams. And my last client there was Anheuser-Busch. So as I was working with AB InBev, I was leading some of the different elements of the sponsorship activation for FIFA World Cup and Budweiser, Corona and the World Surf League. And I got to see the layers that go down into elements of some of the biggest brands in the world, but then also even some of the more up and coming and emerging brands that oftentimes sit in a portfolio like Anheuser-Busch that consumers don't even know that they're
Hmm.
all in the same holding company. And when you kind of look at the funnel of everything that goes into a brand, the calculation and funnel itself is all the same, right? Like the elements, the exercise, and the different pieces that can all come together the same. It's really the strength and enforceability of a brand that is what makes it really, really good. And it takes it from good or even from mediocre to good to great.
Hmm.
And, typically taking a step back to what we were talking about, brands as we probably knew it when we were growing up were all just about wow, like the wow effect. Oh my gosh,
Right.
like they're so successful, they're so big, they're so this. Now, today, that vanity has shifted over to wow, they have so many social media followers. Wow, they're so loud. Wow, they're so this. So it still very much is that like wow factor, but it isn't always occupied by success. It's typically like, where are you grasping people the most?
Well, so,
And
but as far as a personal brand is concerned and athletes,
yep.
like, so, in your experience, where has, like, 5 years ago, maybe a bunch of these people that aren't known weren't putting a lot of effort into their brand. Are you seeing, which I've talked to a lot of people, they are seeing that people are spending more time. So do you have a kind of stance on why people are spending more time on their personal brand, even when they're not these superstar athletes?
Yeah, I mean, listen, money is always a topic of conversation. And
Hmm.
anyone that tells you differently is wrong. I think anybody is realizing that they can monetize their brand easier than ever before.
Hmm.
The problem is that people think that they can grab a camera and start a YouTube channel and be Mr. Beast tomorrow. What they
Right.
don't realize is the amount of effort and scale that goes into building a brand like that. So I think monetization is a big one. The second one is that people are often in today's world looking for a void to fulfill, and it's an unspoken void that we all have. Whether it's from the monotonous day to day of our jobs and our kids and our relationships, there's this void that can't always be fulfilled by going to the gym or having a hobby. So maybe it is kind of exploring this secondary evolution of this sense of personality or identification crisis that you might be in. And that's where
Okay.
we see a lot of people in our world that when we work with professional athletes, celebrities, across the board, we see that there's oftentimes like they found this small bit of success as something that works and they run
Uh-huh.
with it.
Yeah.
So it really is just kind of seeing something that, is half baked and really
Hmm.
following it through the evolution. Some of the best creators in the world, some of the best people that typically end up being successful, as we label it in quotes, are ones that are just figuring it out as they go. And
Yeah.
that's what makes them so approachable. That's what makes them vulnerable. And that's what makes them really so successful is that they're building
Hmm.
in real time and people like
Right.
that relatability.
I think that is a key distinction, because uh, kind of as we're going into this world of AI, where anyone can come up with post ideas, and I can come up with a script for my video that I do. I could have an avatar, or AI move my mouth for me. So there's a whole bunch of fake shit that's going to be coming our way soon. And so I think that that's a huge distinction right there, is that people are going to want people that are learning it in real time, that are showing how they got there in real time, even if they make it to this, a position of being, Mr. Beast and things like that. Like, I know where you started. I can go back and see your first video when things are really raw. I think that's an important thing to remember, is that people want to see authenticity and people being real.
Yeah. Well, I
Don't
mean,
you?
think about it this way. We love Taylor Swift, and
Hmm.
we love Taylor Swift more in an unspoken way. And I can confirm this because I've asked my wife this. I
Okay.
say, why do you because she is now a big Travis Kelsey fan. All of a sudden,
Okay.
she loves Travis. And I'm like, well, why are you? And it's like, why are you so focused on their marriage? Why does someone like you in that position find so much attraction to a pop culture relationship? And it's not so much that there's so much power, it's that you're looking at something that's almost unobtainable. And it's kind of spoken individually as like two superstar people that are
Mhm.
so unobtainable, but they're doing something that very much is relatable to people like you and I,
Everyone
which
does.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you want to not necessarily see their downfalls and their failures and stuff like that. What you're really clamoring for and hoping for is they're just like me. And
Mhm.
that authenticity is an unspoken thing that subconsciously sits in all of us as consumers.
Yeah.
So from a consumer marketing standpoint, that's where success lies is the more relatable that you can be to your audience,
Mhm.
people will gravitate towards that. They don't
Yeah.
want to hear hashtag ad. Look at this new
Oh,
protein shake. Like they're over it.
right.
So their relatability is queen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I think there's fear over AI and all of these things, that is how you win, is because it can't be authentic. It's not human. And yeah. So I guess, so one of the things that that you like is purpose over perfection. So, like, how does leading with purpose make a brand more impactful?
Yeah, I think it sticks on the topic of the buzzword that we've been using a lot today, which is authenticity.
Yeah.
Marketing in today's world is it's a bitch. It really is. I am in a very love-hate relationship with what I do and at the point of
Mhm.
career of what I'm doing because it is such a struggle where every day people are trying to simplify, they're looking for shortcuts, and they're looking for ways to make things easier.
Yes.
A la we talk about AI, etc.
AI. Mhm.
But
Everyone wants the little
the
the magic thing that's just gonna boop. I'm gonna be
yeah,
famous. I'm gonna have a viral video. I'm gonna yeah. There really isn't some of those like the people that do have those. They kind of stumble into them,
yeah,
like you were saying, being
yeah.
authentic. So I'm sorry, I derailed you.
No, no, no. I mean, but it's so true. And the hardest part is that a lot of people from a consumer standpoint don't understand that the bigger popularity, notoriety, and as my dear late friend Biggie Smalls always says, "Mo money, mo problems" that you have, that in that same culture and effect, it becomes very difficult for you to relate to your consumers, no matter what you do. Again, grassroots marketing, guerrilla marketing, any way that you can simplify it always helps. But spending $30 million on a Super Bowl commercial, no matter how good it is really,
Yeah.
really difficult still to relate, right?
Mhm.
So when you look at purpose-driven marketing, it's sure messaging, but it's cause and action, and not
Mhm.
immediate cause and action, but what's the long-term repetitive cause and action? And that's where anything that we do with our clients on the talent athlete representation side, it very much is something that, sure, they can be a really good athlete. They can have
Mhm.
great social media numbers. Yeah, they may make some good money, but sustainable wise is really hard for us to always like explain that to them in the upfront. Is like,
Yeah.
what are you doing to sustain this brand so that people continuously keep coming back and they're continuously engaging with you and coming back
And
more and
when you
more and more.
retire.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and what's the evolution of it when you retire, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's merely just on the individual talent side, right? Like we work
Mhm.
with 80 plus different brands, leagues, properties, agencies that are, much more established in their brand messaging and purpose, philanthropic, charitable driven causes and what they do. But it's more difficult for them because you would think, oh, well, it can't be because they have an established product, they have an
Mm.
established being. But again, Pepsi isn't Pepsi because
Yeah.
they did the same thing over and
Right.
over and over again for the last X amount of years. Pepsi has evolved and they've made subtle evolutions. And those
But
subtle
but
purpose driven evolutions are good.
yeah, but I also feel like the consumer has evolved and you
Yep.
have like, Gen Z and they're like, I don't trust you. And so what may have worked for Pepsi 20, 30 years ago
Mhm.
when the more that trust existed, they have to change and they have to be more human. They have to be more real, more purpose driven, just kind of what you're saying. So even from a personal standpoint, you need to do that, but from a business standpoint as well. I feel like a lot
Yep.
of like corporate marketing, because that's how I started, and a lot of them still are just like buy my product, and you're just like, no, what are the
Yeah.
pain points that you're fixing?
Yep.
Be
Well,
human.
I mean, the number one thing that we say every single day, Claire, is what problem are you solving for today?
Yeah.
And that's with our individual clients on the talent side, but even our big brand partners, it might be easier for them because they're like, "Oh, we're trying to get our products in 50 stores." And I'm like, "Okay, that that's your independent sales driven goal. But
Yeah. Yeah.
what product are you trying to relate and fulfill? And again, if it's a hydration product, it's like, oh, we're trying to make people feel hydrated. Got it. But again, work with me. What's a
Yeah.
creative angle? And you
Right.
almost have to go through this like creative exercise of getting people to understand, like that have just thought so robotic for so many years. Like,
Hmm.
what genuinely is your illustrative way of purpose? And
Hmm.
for us, like when we work with athletes, they're blown away to when we ask them these questions because they're like, I'm a professional surfer. I'm an Olympic gold medalist athlete. Like I'm a NASCAR driver. Like, what do you mean? Like I go in circles. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. But listen, if you're not going to just be winning consistently, and if you are, even then, we've seen some of the most winning athletes in the entire world have the most awful, boring brands and they
Mm.
don't sustain. They
Hmm.
retire, they go away, and you never hear
Yeah.
from them again.
Right.
So, it is a big struggle too, just because on that purpose driven side, not everybody wants to do it. like
Right.
the brands themselves, they kind of have to,
We have
right?
to do.
Because there's always
Yeah.
there's definitely a sales component to it mostly, but athletes, we struggle with it every single day to help them understand that we're defending them in the market to brands and companies that they're not salespeople at the forefront.
Right.
But they need to be vulnerable enough to accept that as consumers and human beings, first and foremost, they have a favorite type of cereal. They have a
Mhm.
certain type of socks that they wear. There are things that are relatable and adaptable to them. Like maybe their mom had a really bad battle with diabetes. That is a very authentic and credible mission statement to a foundation or a nonprofit. And you
Yeah.
start pulling those layers back, and they're just like, I would have never thought about that. And it's
Mhm.
disappointing for us because that's where I think back to my previous years at like big agency stuff like that. Those questions and that journey is not the most economically successful for people in our position, but it's where we find the most success in having long enduring relationships is to reestablish and refine what that brand purpose and intent is for people like
Mhm.
that. Because again, they're people. And just like
Mhm.
you and I, you have your brand, I have my brand individually. Congruently, we're sitting here talking about other people's brands. They may not even have a snowball's chance of a thought of even
Yeah.
thinking that I should have a brand. My wife has
Right.
a brand and she's
Yeah.
like, I don't have a brand. I'm like,
Yeah.
you watch Real Housewives every single night. That's your brand. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think it's interesting because I sometimes am met with a lot of resistance from like family friends and things like that. Like this is they kind of get their bristles up like this is stupid. Like and I'm just like you're trying to help people, but then sometimes there's this resistance because they don't want to do it. It is hard. It may be uncomfortable. Like you're talking about with I mean sometimes when we're dealing with people like clients or things like that, and tell me if you've had this happen to you, you're like, this is how you do it. Yeah, I know that you've got all this stuff that you've done before, but it won't last. And you need to kind of think of how to kind of, plan for the future and things like that. Because sometimes we have clients that are just like, or I had a friend say this, like, I am known, I am successful, I'm doing all these things. I don't need to do this. You're like, no, you don't need to, but it could significantly improve your future.
you can lead a horse to water, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, as you know, the saying goes time and time again, and it's not it's not to say that the horse isn't thirsty, that the interest isn't
Hmm.
there, that people don't want success or anything like that, but it's also not to say that it's not about timing. And as individuals like you and I, our responsibility is to be consistent in our message
Hmm.
and consistent in our learnings, our educations, and sharing them for our own vulnerable benefit in a lot of ways. Because part of brands like you and I have established over the years is that like we're educating people, but we're also forced to entertain them in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
And it goes back to that model of what I always say, education, entertainment. Like again, every single thing we do in consumer marketing sits at that intersection. And what you're supposed to do is to catch people right in the middle of that. So for people like you and I, the entertainment portion of it is to breathe it. And again, the same way that you have this podcast and the same way that
Hmm.
you spend your valuable time and effort not making billions and billions of dollars doing this. I mean, if you do, God bless. But, like I would say it's to really educate and also breathe and breathe that into people that, again, this too is an exercise where again, you use this as like your own selfish and selfless way to learn from
Hmm.
others through communication and conversation. And
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize that that's typically where it comes from. Like some of the best things you'll ever learn in life are not going to be in the classroom or from hearing a lecture from your parents. It's going to be through the innocent bar conversation at 2:30 in the morning. Like it really comes from the places most unknown, but you have to
Hmm.
make yourself open and vulnerable enough to be able to accept that. And then
Yeah.
when you so choose to execute it is up to you. You can only do
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. Interesting. So, okay. So someone is, all right, I'm going to, build my personal brand. Why is it important to kind of be curious and open? Why talk to somebody at a bar? Like, why do stuff like that? Why put yourself out there really?
Why not? I mean,
but
I mean,
but like
it's
we were saying, there are people that are like, I need convincing.
yeah. I mean, I say why not, but it's also We live in such a world where social media consumes us. Our
Mhm.
dopamine levels and cortisol levels are being drained at, levels that have never even been foreseen in centuries.
Yeah.
We're drained. We're drained. Like I'm sure, much like you, like I will get off of this podcast today, and I will have to do 15 million more emails, do
Mhm.
things with my family, and this and that. By the time it gets to be 9 o'clock tonight, I'm just like a zombie.
Yeah.
But where is it that it becomes at least the most subliminal and appetizing benefit that can still almost be like a multivitamin to me in life? And for me, what I always tell people is that they owe it to themselves not to feel like feel like it's forced, right? Because this shouldn't be forced. It's like working out, right? Like I
Yeah.
am the worst example of that. I have every access to vitamins, top trainers, top athletes. I should be jacked. I should be ripped. I should have like no stress in the world. I am literally the flabbiest 37-year-old Connecticut dad in that this world has ever seen. But to that same credit, like I know that those resources are still available to me. It comes at a time and a place where I want to use it to where and however I want to use it. So
Yeah.
my level of fitness is the same way that some people look at like their education style and their absorption style. I feel like in today's world, we are in such a screaming, yelling, like, let me shove my opinion and
Ugh.
political and religious
Yes.
beliefs down your throat. If there's anything that I have learned from doing what I've done over the last 15 years is that it's time and place. You have to understand that it's not always for everybody. And you have to
Mhm.
take a second to read reactions and read the room. Again, what I can do, what you can do, it's a light switch, right? It doesn't always have to be on. But when you've done it enough and you're consistent enough, it's like being a urgent care or a hospital. And it's a bad example because we're not curing or solving the world, but what I mean is you're
Well,
always
maybe we
open.
are.
Yeah, maybe, but you're always on. You're always
Yeah.
available, and I think accessibility is key. So for
Mhm.
for me, I always just try to educate people on accessibility and knowledge and information, and sometimes that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because as I use myself as the example, when I know that things are accessible, I'm almost more lazy. But
Mm.
there are going to be times when it is habitually accessible and I start going down that path and I can't let it go. And I build that habit. So again, what we have to do is just build the pillars for accessibility and information
Yeah.
and knowledge. And that typically can come through conversations and it can come through networking and just pure case studies and examples. Someone's going to want to listen to us.
Yeah.
Again, somebody will listen to this podcast. Like somebody will
I
listen and be blown away. Maybe not
yeah.
our parents, maybe not our significant others, but somebody will find this information valuable. And if they do,
Yeah.
that's one person more than you and I could have ever imagined.
And I always kind of like that's what it's not it isn't not everyone's going to do it. And that is the reality. So there's plenty of opportunity because not everyone's going to do it. And so the ones that do and do it well, like all the things that you're talking about, know their purpose and solve pain points, things like that. Those people will have success, and those are the people that we're talking to. Because sometimes the ones that are just like super resistant, I'm like, I don't have the time for this. The
Yeah.
other
Yep.
part that I also, in addition to kind of those people that are super resistant, you also have those people that are so obsessed with the vanity metrics. They want a million followers, but they're like a tech nerd or something. And I mean, you're just kind of like, and then all the algorithms keep changing for all the platforms to not encourage people to follow you. They're like, oh, people are interacting with this. I'm going to keep showing this person that this, they're not following this person. But I'm going to keep showing them in the feed because they like their content. So what is your kind of feedback to somebody that's obsessed with the numbers, like followers, things like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's about goals, right?
Mm,
And I mean, again, if somebody's going to rub in my face that they want somebody that has super high engagement or an audience that's based in Japan versus Russia, or if they, want 2 million followers versus 1 million, to me, that very much tells me that they're not asking the right questions. And
mm,
it depending on who and how the approach and exchange is, whether it's a brand asking to do a campaign or whether it's an athlete, kind of approaching us and asking like typically like how does somebody with my social media metrics and levels like look like revenue wise with other clients of yours? I I almost laugh them out of the door because I'm just like, listen, you're asking and focusing on very much the wrong metrics. Now, listen, if they're very
Mm.
vulnerable and people are coming to the table and asking basically the scripted question that they were handed because they don't know any better, well, I'll happily have a discussion. I'll never talk down to somebody. But what you have to realize and understand is that those metrics against any goals are going to be vastly, vastly different.
Mm.
And one example I can give you is we have a client. She has consistently been in probably the 30 to 50,000 Instagram follower range. And we've worked with her for 6.5 years. She is a very, very well known athlete in her respective niche sport, but she's also so multifaceted and dimensional in what she's done that she gets more volume of campaigns and deals more than
Hmm.
any client that I've ever had. And I have clients that have millions and millions of followers and huge engagement rates and people that get six-figure, sometimes seven-figure campaigns and program offers. But this individual is consistent because she has very much understood what her pillars and lanes are, where does she need to harness and fine tune them. And then on
Hmm.
top of that, very much not lose sight or focus of it. And she very much understands that there's a value in community over currency. And
Mm.
she's really leaned in that community piece. So,
Yeah.
to me, I always say, like, again, my response to that is always, well, what are the goals that you're trying to accomplish against? And if people are just like, well, it doesn't matter. Like I have a client that just they're giving me a budget and I need to do a campaign with somebody with 2 million followers. I have turned down deals where I have had brokers or other agents approach me and they're just like, "Well, it doesn't matter. This brand just told me to find a tennis player with 2 million followers." And I'm like, if the buck stops there, then
Hmm.
this isn't beneficial to either party. So, I mean, again, it's a civil responsibility that we have to our clients to vet things accordingly. Yeah, we want them to get paid, but we also don't want them to be doing shampoo commercials just to do that.
Right. It needs to be in alignment. That makes sense. So if you had an athlete that just at a bar, because you mentioned that before, and they're like, I'm going to pick your brain. What three things would you advise them to do to build their brand? They didn't hire you. They're just asking your advice over a drink.
Yeah, I mean, the data nerd in me is I'm always like I'm always asking what your goals are, right?
Yeah.
Like what are you trying to accomplish? What have you experimented with? And I think that's important because there's no script, Claire. There really isn't. And anybody in my position, if they're able to pull three things out of their ass and just say like, "Oh yeah, well it's definitely here." Like you can always give baseline starting points, things that
Hmm.
are kind of, understood, whether you're a professional or not in this industry. But, I think it's important to ask the right questions. So, I mean, first and foremost, I'm asking a series of questions, and you need to understand from those questions, probably my first point, which is what have you experimented with and what has worked and what hasn't worked? So, kind of a cost benefit analysis or a risk analysis, right? What has worked for your brand to date and what hasn't, and what takeaways do you have from that? I think it's important to always do a brand audit. So that's the first and foremost thing that I always advise people to do. The second point of that is when you look at your brand and 5 to 10 people that you're closest with, I always tell people they owe it to themselves to go to those individuals and say like, "Hey, what is like the one word that comes to mind, or what is like the one sentence that comes to mind when you think about me?" Like and remove our relationship, but from a vanity standpoint, like what is it? What is that? And tell them to be unfiltered. And you might be surprised at some of the answers you get, or some of the answers you don't get. And that should be really eye opening too, because if people can't answer that question, well, that should be eye opening as well.
Hmm.
So I think, kind of an extension of the brand audit is kind of leaning into your front facing community to understand what is your identity and what does your like
Yeah.
surface level identity look like. The third thing is, really analyzing what your goals are. And what I mean by that typically is just saying, are you trying to make $1 million? Are you trying to be an influencer? Are you trying to do any of that stuff? Like, cool, like write it down. But I think it's critical to have three very differentiating goals that one is super attainable, one is moderately attainable, and one is extremely difficult to obtain. I think it's always important for goal setting to set goals at like kind of thresholds like that because
Hmm.
listen, if you got off the couch today to go to the gym, you should still celebrate that to some people,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Versus, some people think they need to wake up tomorrow and run a half marathon, to be successful. And that's not always the case. So threshold goals are important. And then I think once you kind of have at least like that good understanding, it's going to be eye opening. And a lot of people don't think it is. They're like, oh, I'm not going to learn anything. It's going to be boring work. But listen, if you want to take building a brand seriously, it's, the riches are in the niches, and the hyper boring work and the things that are not sexy and are very
Mhm.
monotonous and tiring, that's where people make their money. That's where people
Yeah.
make their success, is truly understanding what their service offering is, what their difference maker is, and how that can be a very unique service offering to a very unique and faceted community of individuals.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I love that advice. Andrew, this has been a really great conversation. I've loved it. A lot of great information for anyone building their brand. And for those of you that are kind of like, oh, I don't want to do it, maybe this gave you the kind of like kick that you needed. I certainly hope so. Um, Andrew, if someone wanted to reach out and connect with you, where's the best way to do place to do that?
Yeah. So I'm first off, kudos to you. Most people do not get our agency name right, and it's a tongue
Okay.
twister for intention. But Athelo Group is two words: athletes,
Okay.
opportunities, smashed together to make a funky little run-on word that most people can't pronounce. So it's good marketing. But AtheloGroup.com is typically a good starting point. All of our social channels, ATHELO Group, and you can always reach me by email, Andrew@AtheloGroup.com.
Great. I will make sure that all that information is in the description box. Andrew, really, really love this conversation. Thank you for being here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Claire. Really appreciate the time.
And thank you for listening and watching. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye.